Welcome to Uncomfortable Conversations about Culture and Christianity. My name is Alex, and today we are here. We told you. We said last week we're taking a break, but we've got a little surprise for you. You know, celebrating 250 years of our country's birthday. We might as well have a surprise birthday present. It's for our country. Not really, but we're going to have a bonus episode this week. It's timely. We're going to be talking about Elon Musk. He made headlines if you were anywhere and on any kind of social media or news. He became the world's first trillionaire. And so I got a text from my friend, the president of Orchard Alliance, a few weeks ago saying he's going to be in town and we should talk about this. So without further ado, Scott Kubie, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, thanks, Alex, for having me on. I just really appreciate it and love talking about trillionaires and how we can all become one. No, that's not the purpose.
That's not the aim of this.
That is not the aim.
We had to tell people at the end.
Oh, sorry.
That's the bait for people to keep listening.
Okay, I got to get this podcasting hang. I listen to enough. I must fall for the bait every time.
Listen to this whole episode, and you too can become a trillionaire.
Yeah, okay, got it. Okay.
So, Scott, I know you've been on the podcast before, but for those who aren't familiar with you, what your role is, why in the world do you even care about this kind of stuff, just tell us.
Yeah, so I work for Orchard Alliance, which is a subsidiary of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, and we serve the Alliance family for faith and finance meet. And that can be as much as helping churches with loans, but we spend an awful lot of our time thinking about how stewardship, generosity, financial discipleship work, so people can use their money in the way that God wants them to. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we see to do, because we think that ultimately drives long-term joy. And this is a topic that sparks some challenges for some people, and so I thought it was worth addressing.
Yeah, so headlines would have told us that a couple weeks ago, Elon Musk became the first trillionaire, but the episode's not necessarily just about how much money he has. It'll be about maybe some history of money, other people that have had an abundance, I think we can call a trillionaire, or that much money in abundance. Does he actually have that kind of money? We'll talk about all those things. And just how Christians, how do we think about an extraordinary amount of wealth? So like, as you're reading this, you live in this world a little bit more, finances and stuff. As you heard that, I mean, that's a wild number. Like, what were some of your first thoughts of?
My first thought, which I don't think is where most people go, which is, man, you have created a lot of value for people, that someone would value the business that you've created at over $1 trillion. And so, you look at it, he's created, so he originally came from PayPal. He's part of what they call the PayPal mafia, which is, we develop terms like that in financial areas just to try to make ourselves sound cool.
Cool, I hadn't heard it. I didn't know he was part of the mafia.
Yeah, so not the real mafia, just the PayPal mafia. And so he actually sold a company to PayPal for significant money, like more than any of us ever think that we would ever earn in our lives. And yet, he's just kept going. So he's an extremely driven individual. But he turned around and created a car company. You think about, I've got a great idea for a car company. But to get somebody else to believe you have a great enough idea for a car company, that they would actually get you the money in order to build a factory. We're not talking making a social media business or something like that. We're talking high capital investment. And he went and created the most successful electric car company in the world. And then turned around and said, I want to keep going, and pretty much did the rockets. And now we're onto internet, which is really those two businesses combined are what makes SpaceX such a valuable organization. How he runs them all at the same time, no one really knows, but it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's wild. And for me to I can't wrap my mind around that many zeros. But then, then the questions start to come to me like, what does that even mean? How... He couldn't just say, all right, I'm cashing in, I'm going to a bank somewhere and say, give me my trillion. Like, that's not how it actually
you're looking in equity and you're looking in value. And some of that, and if he did it, then he would have sold. And then, man, everybody else would look at it and go, well, if he's selling, I should probably sell too, because he's getting out. And a lot of the value in those companies is based on him running them. And that's why, if you look back over times, he's had some really massive salaries and such. But that's because people can go on, that's value in there. One of the things, too, that's in the world we live in today, more than 20 years ago, more than 40 years ago by a lot, is become a bit more of a winner takes all. If you wanted to search for something on the internet, you Google that. Well, why does it called Google? Because there were other search engines,
Yeah.
but they were the dominant search engine. That winner took almost everything. In phones, you're talking 2 primary operating systems. It's where 1 or 2 companies win it all, and the rest of them fail. Well, if you're starting something, you want to pay up for the really talented person because they're really likely to win. Because it's not like you're going to be 10% better off. No, you might be 300, 500, 6,000% better off versus 0. And so that's where these founders, these amazing creators of wealth, are really going to earn premium wealth from that, premium salaries, because that's where the economy is structured.
Yeah, and I think people in Omaha, we know of people. We brag about our guy, Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
That's made a lot of money, invested into so many different things. And oftentimes I think Christians, we don't know how we should feel about somebody that's really, really rich, because we read scripture and like the narrative of scripture doesn't introduce us to a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
It introduces us to really rich people, but they're kings. They're people that dominate. They plunder everything you've got, take all your gold, take all your money. I'm going to build my wealth off of the suffering of other people.
Yeah. And I think that's something that certain people, especially younger people, that become more critical of capitalism. They grew up during the financial crisis, which wasn't capitalism's, that wasn't their chamber of commerce day, so to speak, as far as where it goes. And so the younger people look at this and go, this isn't good. But they are missing out on the fact that there's really great value in not having the state determine where capital should be allocated. One of the purposes that markets do is say, hey, where should we invest? AI wouldn't exist if value hadn't been moved in that direction and companies' values to and cause other people to go, oh, we could do that. I've got some ideas on that. Let's start something in order that we can take advantage of that. And so pricing helps people allocate capital to the areas where society thinks it will be most valuable. That's an extremely valuable function.
So how do we start to figure out the difference between creating wealth, someone like an Elon Musk creating wealth, or others that are out there, and just extracting wealth? Like the old Robin Hood kings, steal from the rich, give to the poor, but someone's extracting it from somebody else. And maybe you think more, I don't know, there's political, commentary on what that looks like. But how do we start to think as Christians? How do we know the difference between someone that's created wealth for themselves and just, I guess, extracted it by living off of everybody else or taking?
Yeah, so Musk is interesting because he's creating new things. Now, there are people that lose. Comcast stock is down 30%. What do they do? Well, they own NBC, but they're a big cable TV operator, and they're also a big internet provider. And so he's going in and saying, hey, I think I can do better at providing internet service than Comcast did. That's great. We benefit from that. Now, if you're a Comcast shareholder, you lose. That's okay. It causes them to need to try to figure out how to do things better. That's what capitalism does is it absolute best. Whereas extraction look like is, oh, I've got power and I'm going to force somebody to pay because I'm using that power. And so Musk is an interesting case because it's almost all creation. In fact, he's taking on the biggest corporations formally and winning. And that really says, hey, we're taking on, there are losers, but it is ultimately how can we raise the level of benefit to society by giving society the things that it wants and it values. And that's definitely what creation stands for. Extraction is mostly about using power to get money from people. When Zacchaeus in the Bible has to give back, he says, I will give back all this, I forget how many times the money is of the people I've cheated. What it tells you is that tax collection in the Roman Empire was an extraction business.
Yeah.
And he was he didn't create wealth. He wasn't making the city better. He was sending money back to Rome, and he was keeping some of it for himself. And some of it, if you say, I might have cheated somebody, you probably cheated somebody.
I think it's easy for us to think of someone that's got, $1 million, and then now they've got 100 million, and then $1 billion, and now $1 trillion, to just think of them as greedy people. Like, I think, why do you need more? You'll never be able to spend this all in your life, never to be able to do any of that. As Christians, and maybe it's part of maybe my faith is just how much is enough, and ultimately Jesus is enough and not money, So how do we wrestle with like somebody that's just worth this much money, or even just somebody that's worth whatever, millionaire, billionaire, how do we not just assume they're greedy, or should we assume they're greed?
So we played basketball today, Alex, earlier today. I think you outscored me. I think I've outscored you maybe once in a day in the entire hundreds of times that we play basketball. You're a much better basketball player than I am. How come you don't share the ball and stop scoring so many points?
Yeah,
because
that's the question everyone asks. Right?
It is, and when you're scoring 12 of the 15, So I was a great basketball player. Money at this level is more like points in a basketball game than it is like salary. You know what? I just like playing the sport, and you know what? If I can score, I can score. I don't think Warren Buffett doesn't really live a whole lot differently. And a lot of other people don't live a whole lot differently as their wealth goes up. But it's really the reward for applying what they have been gifted to do. And so that's my analogy. It's not LeBron. Like LeBron's leaving the Lakers. Well, they didn't create the space for him to be re-signed. All good. If he wants to get fully paid for what he's worth, he's got to go somewhere else at this point. Fantastic. But either way, he's not going to stop scoring points because that's what the world wants him to do. And in the same way, Warren Buffett isn't going to stop managing Berkshire Hathaway, although he did finally fire himself a couple years ago and brought in there. But he's still active within this. And the same with Elon Musk. He isn't going to stop creating just because he's reached, because he didn't start creating just for the money. Probably some for the money, but not just for the money. This is really what he enjoys doing. Warren Buffett, he made more money after most people retire in fact, more of his wealth came after retirement age than it was before retirement age, and he was extremely successful. How come? He just liked running Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah, I think that is fascinating and something to think about. Okay, so we talk about $1 trillion, and like I said earlier, I don't think he can go to the First National up the road and say, all right, how much cash you got in the vault? Give me $1 trillion. So let's talk about what does that even mean that he's worth $1 trillion or was, worth at least a couple weeks ago? That's going to go up and down. But how do we understand that those of us that know, or I'm assuming you said no, he doesn't have $1 trillion sitting in a bank somewhere.
He does not.
So how do we figure that out?
So his wealth is based on the estimate of some of his companies that he owns significant portions of. So you can look at SpaceX. What's the price of it? How many shares of it does he own? And therefore, that's the amount of his wealth that comes from SpaceX. You can do the same thing with Tesla. He also has other investments, homes, things like that. He has a mining company that digs tunnels that's worth $5 billion. Nobody even knows he has a company worth $5 billion because it's rounding error in his financials. It would not be rounding error in our financials.
Yeah.
That just tells you. And so he owns all these businesses that he's created, plus other investments. And so we can get an estimate of how that is. And so when SpaceX drops by 10%, his net worth goes down. And if it goes up by 7% the next day, it goes up. But he really can't sell either amount at that price, but that gives it an estimate of what that company's worth.
Yeah. And so, as Christians, and maybe because we live in a capitalist society, how should we think about the good that wealthy people, especially believers that have a lot of money and God's gifted, with the idea of innovation and all these things, how should we start to frame and maybe root for? And we're not saying Elon Musk is that, but when we think about money, I think oftentimes we put an Elon Musk or Warren Buffett and then we're like, well, if I were a Christian, I am Christian. If God gave me everything Elon Musk had, I would give it all away and I live on this and blah, blah, blah. So, but there are plenty of wealthy, believers, Christians, professing Christians. So how should we learn to root for appropriately, maybe that kind of situation?
Yeah, that's a really complicated question. So a couple layers, I would say. One is we say we value every work, whether it's ministry work or non-ministry work, the same. But I spent the vast majority of my career in a for-profit or enterprise before I moved into running the financial services arm of a nonprofit. And I found that ministry occurred in both of those places. So when we start to say, we're starting to attack a little bit what that is all work really be able to be called by God? Is it all part of kingdom? Can you do ministry in making a tunnel or providing internet service? I will say, yeah, you can. But that bias starts to creep in a little bit where we start to diminish other people's work, and that's not right.
Yeah.
And so we also, in fact, we have an organization that we get some services from. And the biggest thing that I would love that they would change is I would love if they became a for-profit business. And the reason is because as a not-for-profit, it's harder to govern a not-for-profit. You're not really trying to make that much money. And really what I would desperately like them to do is make more money by serving me better. And so I would love to see them structurally adjust that, and because I think a for-profit business would be better at serving the needs of people than a not-for-profit one. And I think we got to admit that, and the nice thing about that is for-profit businesses, they provide employment, they provide services, they provide benefits. If it hadn't been for, we would not have as many electric cars on the road today if Tesla hadn't been a for-profit business. No way the government could have mandated it. They couldn't have designed it. They couldn't have gone through that effort. And so we've got to recognize that the for-profit capitalist side produces lots and lots of benefits to society that would be very hard for the government to do if they were in charge of it, or would be very hard for the church to do if they were in charge of it as well. And I think we should recognize that.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, you're right. I mean, the job of quote unquote the church, or what we look at as ministry, air quotes, is ultimately actually to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry, right? But we've oftentimes in our head thought, no, you're the ministers doing the ministry. And it's like, well, actually, we're the ones that are equipping those who are out in the world to do the ministry. We need that. That's how the Great Commission continues to expand and the gospel continues to go forward. If I walk into, your former workplace, I know nothing about any of this. They're just going to be like, who is this guy and what is he doing here? But you have an unique opportunity and inroad to speak the language.
And my former position, it was like I can witness to my coworkers, but let's go all the way to say, no, the biggest ministry I did was helping my customers. The primary way that we help each other on a sustainable basis in society is providing services and jobs that people want and need at the time they need them. And so I would sit down with a financial planner and some of their clients and say, how should we allocate your wealth in the way that makes most sense based on what you want to do? And sometimes that was based on what God had called you to do. Sometimes it wasn't, in which case then I got to witness to them by serving them and say, gosh, I want to do and serve you so well because I love you, I care about you, and I just want that to radiate through in what I do. And that service and work I did was ministry. And I think that's a super important aspect.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. Can creating economic value, how can that, and you've talked about it a little bit, how can we equate that to loving our neighbor, like that ultimate call of Jesus?
Yeah, and I think there's one of the things that capitalism does is it creates an incentive and reward for doing that well, and that's one of the spillover benefits. But if I've got an idea on how to help improve the test results of students so that they can, I said this one lady on a plane one time, and her business, she was in the Chicago area, and she provided help for high school students to get into the colleges that they wanted to get into and could reasonably afford to get into. I'm like, how much do you charge? $10,000 per year for 4 straight years. What's the biggest challenge in your business? I asked her. I don't have enough people that can help and meet the demand. Wow. There was somebody was willing to pay for. And the only way we can marshal resources to meet that demand is to providing some degree of incentive and reward to move over in that direction. That's a service. People willing to pay it. And the nice thing is if somebody can do it better, she'll go out of business.
Yeah.
And that's good because that makes her have to continue to work to get better and better, or else somebody can overtake her. I think that's a healthy paradigm in business.
Okay. So we've talked obviously a lot about the health of capitalism and, as Christians, how we should think about it. What are some of the weaknesses, that lie in capitalism and things that it's got flaws? What would you say some of that is?
So most of the problems in my world come back to M&Ms. I love M&Ms. They're my favorite thing. And right now, if you put 20 M&Ms in, I'd probably stop talking and just eat the M&Ms.
I won't even tell you that right over there.
I know there's some
whole,
right over there, and I see Jared, our producer over there, is grabbing the M&Ms. No, Jared,
don't.
Not,
you have to finish the episode. That'll be his reward.
That'll be my reward for that. And so sometimes we want the things that we should not want. The biggest challenge I see with capitalism is we want people to act virtuously, and they're not up to that virtue standard and never have been. But as the virtue levels start to decline, we start to put ourselves in a bad situation. Also, as we offer temptations in our structures, and this is where it's important for legal and personal virtue to come in. So, gosh, should child pornography be legal? No, it shouldn't. Somebody should figure out a way to say that should not be allowed. That's a government function. Should I spend all day? I fly a lot. Do you know what people do when they fly and they land and they can start to get back on their phones if they haven't signed up for the Wi-Fi, which is now all free because of Starlink and SpaceX? They hop on their phones and they start scrolling, or they update their social media. You know what? Their lives are not that interesting. My plane landed is not an interesting fact. And you know what? What happened in the world in the last hour and a half is truly not going to change their lives. They're afraid to be bored. And so we have to look at our personal virtue and also our moral virtue within society. I think those are important aspects of it. And that goes all the way back to Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, and how when capitalism started to elevate to an even higher level. And when it did, lots of people's lives got better, but it does put more pressure on us to make the right choices and to follow what Jesus wants us to do.
I think one of the interesting things about much of wealth at this point, I think, is being created through technology, through investment in technology, AI, things like SpaceX, the internet, and just pushing this forward to things that we, 10, 20 years from now, we can't even, imagine. And I know Elon's working with a lot of different things that he's trying to figure out. And so I think one of the things that you mentioned is like, okay, our government is a capitalistic society and we can have virtue and law and all those kinds of things. I think one of the things that even the Pope highlighted in his encyclical recently is now we've got people like Elon Musk, people that own SpaceX and X and Tesla and all that. And then you've got the founders of Google and you've got Apple, you've got all of these rich people that own technology companies. And if they're not virtuous, right? Like government can't keep up. We think child porn should be illegal, right? And it is illegal, right? But now even locally, there was a teacher that got caught for AI child porn. So now you've got to think, okay, child porn is bad. We all agree on that. Nobody should do it. And then you got people thinking, well, but it's not hurting an actual person now, right? I mean, and so if AI can do it, then we detach, we draw different lines morally. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I've just heard the conversations. And so that keeps pushing that. And more than we can even, there's not laws probably at that point against artificial child porn. And so it's just moving faster and faster and faster, more than we can even govern. And he talks about this technocratic society where our tribes don't shape us as much. Our languages don't shape us as much. Our cultures, it's moving faster because of a lot of this technology and the money that's being made. And these people that have the most money essentially have the most influence, is kind of one of the things that it's pointing towards.
And that last point is they have influence. They don't have absolute power. Who was the most powerful person in Jesus' time was Caesar Augustus.
Yeah.
Well, it was Jesus, but he chose not to use it generally.
Yeah.
And not to be in that space. But Caesar Augustus, he not only was the richest person, but he had an army. The nice thing is these guys have influence, but they don't have true what we call absolute power because they don't have armies. They still fall under the legal system of the United States. It is hard for a legal system to keep up with rapid technological change. Eventually, it will start to catch up and put more regulations on, and that will be healthy. But they're also scared to regulate it in a way that inhibits the growth. The U.S. has grown at about 0.7% per year faster than the European Union has for about 30 or 40 years. That's millions of jobs. It's over 1 million jobs a year more creative. In other words, there are so many more people working in the U.S. because of a willingness to pursue technology, of a willingness not to inhibit economic growth, of a willingness to allow capitalism to function at a higher level, has ultimately benefited society. And we should, whether Musk, my point is I don't care whether Musk is worth $1 trillion or 500 billion or $1 billion, doesn't matter to me. What does matter is, are we creating a system where the economics world aligns with creating a better environment for people to live in? One of the pieces too, when you talk about technological vision, and this is true and it's hard, is I create something great. You know, Zuckerberg created the first social media space. If he hadn't, somebody else will. And so there is a point where like, oh, these guys are shaping. Yeah, they're shaping it. But if this person hadn't done it, somebody else would have been the next person to do that. And that's a hard piece for technological change to rest. Like, oh, I wouldn't do it this way because I don't want to make that much money. But if somebody else comes in and the public doesn't care, the other group's going out of business.
Well, we should actually probably give Tom a shout out because he created MySpace, and then Zuckerberg came in with Facebook and did it better, right?
Yes,
in a way. And so that's even that idea and what you're talking about with capitalism and all that. No one talks about MySpace anymore.
Yeah.
Speaking of people no one talk about, there's a guy named John Kluge. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Right. Everyone knows him, right? We talk about him all the time.
All the time. But yeah, he was the richest man when I graduated in the world, when I graduated from college.
Wow.
And he made his money. What I remembered was, so I looked at this, I looked it up, and it's like, John Kluge, television stations, something weird with one of his wives. That was the two things that hit. And true enough, that was actually what happened. He owned a bunch of television stations. He funded some very important things charitably over time, and not ones that you remember or see. And then there was, after he passed away, his wife had a vineyard that became a big news and stuff like that. And ultimately she sold it to some guy, Trump.
Oh, okay.
Donald Trump ended up buying it, which is just funny how those things show up in there. But yeah, but we pass on. We move on. There's a guy named Robert Morris, who was probably the richest man in the United States at the time of the United States. He funded a huge chunk of the American Revolution. And yet, I don't know, as more than Revolutionary War buffs really know his name. And so it's a reminder that Musk may have hit $1 trillion. We may not remember him nearly as well as other people looking back, probably more now than in the past, but it's a good lesson that wealth is not achievement, and it isn't permanent achievement. It's just part of what happens, and somebody made a lot of money. Yeah. In the end, Musk is going to take the same amount of money to the afterlife as you and I do.
Yeah.
And that's a sobering thought.
Yeah, that is. So I think instead of Christians posturing, because I think that's an easy thing. We see everyone else's money. And that's easy for me to tell everyone else what they should do with their money. Like, oh, here's what Elon should do with their money, or here's what Bill Gates should do with his money. Here's what, whoever you want to put on that line. It's easier for me, Scott. Here's what Scott should do with his money. But I think the real heart of it, and maybe why we like to talk about what everyone else should do with their money, is because it distracts us from, but what about me?
Yes.
What's God called me to do with my money?
Right. And I think that's important, especially for people who start accumulating some of it. Stewardship of wealth is a beautiful blessing, but it's also a bit of a burden. And it's something that God has entrusted to people in order to use and steward well, because ultimately stewardship is a sense that it's all God's. And so if it's all God's, God has entrusted it to you for your benefit, but also for the benefit of people around you, including the church, including families, including the poor, including those that are hurting in society, and supporting your kids and all of those pieces of it. And so you've been placed a burden in order to do that and to do that well. And so one of the things we exist is try to help people make better choices within the assets that they've been entrusted in a better form or fashion. And I think we should be looking at ourselves. So you should let me shoot more in basketball, because that's how I just steward your athletic talents, to work hard and then throw it to me when my guys collapse. And I should probably steward my wealth by purchasing fewer M&Ms. And those would be good starts, but there's bigger starts than that. How much do we give to church? And especially for wealthier people, one of the things we go back to, I think Christians have a few different struggles with this. There was one other one I would pick on, which is they are especially actually ministers actually are the biggest version of, or have the biggest challenge with this, is they want to be the visionaries for what God is trying to accomplish. And sometimes when someone gets really wealthy, they're actually the person that God gives the vision to. And the minister is not the visionary. They're the implementer of the other person's vision or God's vision that was given to someone else. Russell James is a noted Christian charitable giving research, or he's a professor at Texas Tech University and writes extensively on this. And he makes the analogy of Thor versus Thor's hammer. And he says most ministers see themselves as Thor, and the giver is the tool to accomplish what the superhero wants. But truly, when you get into philanthropy, the ministry is the hammer. And the superhero outside of Jesus and God who blessed and created it is actually the giver and the philanthropist who's creating the vision and providing it. And ministry is actually the tool to complete what the philanthropist has been given as vision. That is very uncomfortable for our Christian worldview. Yeah. It's extremely hard for a lot of ministers to handle that, where they're not the central person that's most connected to God. Is they think that, there's an underlying assumption the minister is the person most connected to God. They wouldn't say that, but that's the hidden assumption. And this model actually challenges that to some degree. But we should encourage philanthropists to be listening to God to say, what is it that I'm supposed to do? What's the next thing? And also, for a lot of people, it's what's the thing I shouldn't be doing?
Yeah. I think one of the things that is often misquoted is money is the root of all evil, right?
Yes.
And it's the love of money. That's the root of all kinds of evil. And so as we just process that, and there's money, there's wealth, there's all these kind of things out there, and there's a kingdom to be built, and our kingdom, or the kingdom that God's called us to build. And there's always that battle, but which one am I actually building? And I think our pocketbooks can tell us a lot about that. You follow your credit card statement, and it's not too hard to figure out which kingdom I'm actually investing in the most. But how do we, as you hear that, and you're somebody that's a Christian and work with finances, and I'm sure that what does that mean? The love of money. Like, how do I start to know if it's becoming a love, it's becoming an idol, it's replacing the ultimate love for God inside?
Yeah, so I'll go back to that basketball analogy we talked about of the points versus the salary. If you're playing hard just so you can earn a bigger contract, that would be athletics for a love of money. If you're working hard in athletics in order to be successful and help your team and accomplish and use the gifts that you've been blessed with, then the money is a byproduct of that success. So that's one of those pieces. If Musk's goal was to be a trillionaire, that would be an indication where we're solidly in the love of money zone. If you're an entrepreneur and your goal is to help it so that car collectors have a great place to store and share and keep their cars in a great and safe place, which is not a super kingdom impact type of activity, and you're doing that just so that you can serve those car makers, and they end up paying you a very good rate in order to do that, and you find the best way to do that, I think that's fine. I think that's ultimately service to what people want. And as long as that's a healthy thing, that's great, as long as that's what God's called you to do. If he calls you into something else, you should go after that and pursue that.
That's good. Yeah, this is a lot, and it's a lot to process. And, I think if most of us are honest, we read headlines like this, and, underneath it is this bit of envy, right? This bit of like, yeah, but if I had, or, the things that might come out of our mouth where we're kind of being a little judgmental. Really, it's envy. And that's a commandment. We're not supposed to envy, we're not supposed to want what others have. And so as we process this, and as we process just wealth and all these things, what are some of the thoughts you would have?
Yeah. So I think as we get envious, so that right there is the love of money. You can love money whether you have it or not. And that's an important aspect. And so when people get envious or concerned or hyper justice oriented, a lot of times that really is an underlying, how come I'm not as successful as that person is? But they have committed the same mistake that the greedy person who has lots of money has, which is they've started to measure their worth based on the amount of money they have. Arthur Brooks, who does a lot of work in happiness and an author and does some great stuff, one of the things he points out is we have a society, and going back to that technocratic, we want to keep solving our little problems of our day-to-day and our inconveniences. But we've created a world that is so devoid of meaning. And the people that are most successful, whether they're entrepreneurs, basketball players, ballerinas, or whatever, is they find meaning and joy in the activity that they do. And I think some of this envy is a cover-up for the fact that we have pursued and bought into this view. We're just not as good as other people, so we're envious of it, when in fact there is a source of infinite joy, infinite opportunities to serve, and infinite love that ultimately comes with a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think that is people covering up for the lack of meaning, Christian or not, and pointing the fingers here as opposed to looking and saying, what am I doing to really try to help people, and seeing what benefits come, whether monetary or not, into my own life.
Yeah, I was trying to look it up, so I made sure that I had the right address. You talking reminded me of Jesus' parable in the vineyard in Matthew 20, where, Jesus goes out early in the morning, or the landowner goes out early in the morning, and he recruits some help, tells him how much he's going to pay him. Then he goes out later in the day, gets some more help, goes out later in the day. He keeps going out and getting more help, telling how much he's going to pay them. And at the end of the day, he's, unbeknownst to everyone else that showed up early, he told them all he was going to pay them the same. And the people are mad. They're like, I've been working all day and you're giving them the same thing. And that landowner says, are you envious because I'm generous?
Yes.
And I think that's one of those difficult things for us to wrap our minds around, is God's goodness and faithfulness. And when I stop looking at what I have and I start focusing on what everyone else has, it's like my kids, anytime I cut anything for them, they don't ever look at what's on their plate. They're busy looking at everyone else's plate. He got more, she got more. And that just takes our ability to have joy and satisfaction and just understand God's goodness in our own lives. We just get robbed because we're so envious.
And we also start to look too narrowly. I think, your points are great, but look at Elon Musk. Do you want the relationships that he has with the women who have borne him his children? No, you don't.
Yeah.
Do you want to be his kid with one of those weird names that no, you don't. I mean, he's really, really good at something that gets rewarded monetarily. That doesn't mean he's joyful.
Yeah.
He just has a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so we can learn lessons from it, but we should also make sure that we don't learn the wrong lessons from it at the same time.
Yeah. I just wrapped up before this, between basketball and this, a funeral. And I can't imagine, that being the eulogy.
Yes.
That she was worth worth $1 trillion. And I wasn't talking about the speeches that her family was reading about how generous she was and how gracious she was and how she loved and showed up at all the times where the family needed it the most. I mean, if that was it, all of those things aside, but we were talking about how much money she made that she doesn't get to take with her right now. That's just in the world, man. What a sad testament of a life not well lived. Not well lived.
And you know what? We shouldn't be measuring ourselves in that way. And I think that's one of the key lessons we should take from this.
Yeah. Well, Scott, this has been fun. Anything else? I know you're craving those M&Ms. So anything else you want to make sure we cover?
You mentioned M&Ms and the thought process shuts down. I think make sure, take this opportunity when you start thinking about somebody else's money, remember that you matter a lot. You matter to God, and you don't matter any more or any less than Elon Musk or a homeless person or that. It's not the way that God sees it. Your example of all the people that, the work in the vineyard, everybody mattered the same and got paid the same. And that's not really truly a financial parable. That's a parable about how God sees the world, and it's different. Make sure you know how God sees you. And do not measure your worth and value, because you know what? This is a blip. It's an important blip. It matters a lot. Life matters here on earth a lot, but it's not everything. And we get to spend an eternity in a beautiful, bountiful place. And make sure you live like you know that that's where you're headed.
So good. So good. Well, I appreciate it. And I know you blog and things like that. How do people, like, if people want to, they're like, hey, I like what this guy's saying about finances and stuff. How do they find that?
Yeah, probably easiest way to track me down is, so there's orchardalliance.org. The other space is find me, Scott Kubie, on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And we publish about everything I put out goes out on LinkedIn as well. There are all sorts of great and not so great social media sites. That's been the one where we've found the best connection with people. And so they follow me there. It'd be great.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed the surprise episode here this week. And as we mentioned last week, and I don't think we have any more surprises, we're going to be taking a little bit of a break for July, August, gearing up for what's next. But we would love to hear from you. If you've got ideas, or you're like, talk to this person, talk about this book, talk about this issue, man, we love to talk about what you want us to talk about. And so would you send us an email, podcast@cccomaha.org. You can find us TikTok, Instagram @CCCOMA podcast. Leave us a voicemail with an idea, or you can text that number 402-885-9930. But until next time, we will talk to you then.